Hello, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to the Beyond the Bloodwork Summit 2.0. Give everybody some time to come on in. We are also live streaming on Facebook as well. So for anybody that might have engagements this morning that needs to kind of toggle to and fro. Hello. We have a fun day planned today. Lots of cool info, even some activities. Good morning, Cara. So who here is on day 2? Who here is new? If you came yesterday, put a 1. If you're brand new and you missed yesterday, put a 2. All right, got a little bit of both. So I will have entirely new content today, but for those of you who are new, I will just give another brief introduction as to RCC, kind of another layer as to who we are and what we do. So in this actual startup image, you'll see we have a tincture, or it looks like a little bottle, as well as a box, as well as a laser. So when we talked about how we use physics yesterday, well, I'll not go into the complete gory details of it all. How are we actually giving that to people, right? That's kind of the question. So like this frequency business, what is that all about? And so you'll see on the left with the tincture, I actually take these myself every day. I've got my own right here. So what we're doing is we're actually transferring frequency. We have this on a superconductor and we're transferring the specific individual frequencies into this actual reduction, which has structured water and alcohol. And so that's actually kind of a custom homeopathic, if you will, for somebody. The box in the middle is actually the test kit. So if you do scan with Root Cause Clinic, this is what's arriving to your house, and you're actually going to take your own specimens in-house, and then you mail them back to us with the prepaid shipping. That arrives at the lab, we process it, we upload your results, you meet with the practitioner to discuss your results. And on the right, we're actually going to get into talking a little bit about today, because when you have what I call issues in the tissues, the lasers are one of my favorite options. Sometimes there's no substitute for things that are tactile and or from the outside in as far as how they're able to stimulate the healing process. So let's go ahead and get started. Looks like Kalina has asked about a recording. Yes, I believe there is a recording up on Facebook from yesterday. So you should be able to, if you're part of our Facebook group, go in and catch that recording to bring you up to speed. All right, I got so much material, so I'm going to get on with it. So again, for those of you who are new and just joining us today, my name is Veronica Leslie. I'm one of the founders of Root Cause Clinic. We have some subsidiary companies as well, one of them being House of Hertz, where we do microcurrent neurofeedback. 2 of those locations, one in Utah, in St. George, and another one in Solana Beach, San Diego, California. And of course, there's Where Physics Meets Physiology, the new educational program that we have to empower you to step out of the patient role and into the driver's seat. And this here is my partner in crime, Ms. Deanna Morales, the other half of RCC, co-founder. She's also today moderating the chat. So if you have any questions that I don't get to, I'll try to get to as many things as I can, but if we can't, we will have some opportunities for question and answers later. So for those of you who can actually stay beyond the hour, and Deanna will also do her best to try to help in the chats as well. All right, and together we present to you our Beyond the Bloodwork Summit, which is hosted also in part by Where Physics Meets Physiology. So the Beyond the Bloodwork Summit. Yesterday we talked about understanding how far the root cause spectrum really goes. If we are only looking at what already is, at just the body, the machinery of the body, even the blood work, because, the blood is tactile, the blood is physical. There are a lot of things that we miss when we're only in that hardware world, as we talked about. Those of you who are new and joining us and wondering what the heck is this hardware business, if you catch the recording on Facebook, it'll bring you up to speed with some of these analogies. Essentially, we kind of made the analogy that there is the software that can run the hardware, right? Hardware problems are going to be things that are wrong in the physical body, including the blood work. Even though it's chemistry, it's still physical. Oftentimes when we can't find a solution to our symptoms and we're doing all the things in these areas and nothing's really moving the needle, or it just keeps coming back, then there's a software glitch that keeps tripping up the hardware. And what we do at Root Cause Clinic is we work with the software. So yesterday I saw all over Instagram, this seemed to be the most popular slide that everybody was sharing. It seems like it kind of blew everybody's mind to look at the single cell and think, my gosh, this is a little mini piece of artwork, right? So again, this is the sonocytology field that is starting to kind of emerge based out of UCLA, who kind of pioneered this field. And on the left, we see a healthy cell with organized information, right? On the right, we do not see that. The right was supposed to indicate a cancer cell. But mind you, it doesn't have to be cancer to lose its organization. That's just kind of what we epitomize as being the worst type of loss of information, period. Well, today, if you liked what we went through yesterday, you're going to kind of like what we're going to go through a little bit today. So you'll see that geometry now is actually considered the future of immunology. I bet you never thought that what you studied in high school with trigonometry and geometry, et cetera, were actually going to come into being useful for you, but it is. And so the reason why that is because as scary as this looks, it's actually pretty simple. The field geodesics refers to the fact that nature is efficient. Nature will take the most efficient way. She doesn't make anything harder than it has to be. So if you notice here in the up right-hand corner, there's a bunch of almost prismatic looking type of geometric shapes, right? And you'll note that there's kind of red lines that are drawn around some of them. What that's meant to indicate is the most efficient way to get from point A to point B. And so if we were to do this on a flat line, like the geometry that we kind of studied, the 2D, two-dimensional geometry that we studied in high school, that is a lot easier to calculate, but it's also not realistic, right? Because we're on a curved surface. And so to take that into consideration is a little bit different. The spherical qualities to life, right? Whether it's a small virus, and by the way, these are actually literally representing viruses. As you saw, viruses will have shapes that reflect the platonic solids or geometric shapes, right? Icosahedrons, tetrahedrons, etc. So what happens is when we have any type of issues, injury to the cell, if it's starting to look more like that cell on the right, and let's go ahead and actually go back so you can just get another glance at that, right? All this space here is able to uniformly move, right? Whether that's to push fluid around the cell, do whatever processes we need. This here on the right, that's not going to create the same situation, right? So right there out the gate, we're changing the way that the cell is literally going to work. So issues in the tissues or issues in the cells are going to control the potential of how we're going to be able to transfer and transmit that information, right? So you could be giving all the right things to support a processes, things to support your cellular health, right? You may even be getting worse and actually not feeling better. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But the point being is that while this may look very intimidating, the takeaway here is that nature is efficient. She wants to take the course of action that is the least amount of energy expenditure. She's economical, but it doesn't mean that she's any less elegant, right? And you'll see that reflected all throughout nature, even including our own tissues. When we cannot, or there's something that interrupts the efficiency of how nature wants to transfer her information, she has to then look for the most next efficient way. That's where we start getting into trouble, because when that happens, we start crossing through areas with information that it wasn't really designed to receive. We start changing the message, and no wonder why we're actually changing the effect. This brings us actually into a very, very, very cool piece of information. As you'll know, it's actually almost 10 years old now. So a lot of what I'm presenting to you, it's, medicine takes some 20 years before it even begins to maybe mention something to the medical students that are actually studying for the future generations. That's, if again, it gets past all those powers that be. But, it takes a while before the average person in the household will actually come into finding out what kind of technology has been around for a while. So we're actually onto even more advanced stuff than this right here. But to give you a picture, the stem cells of the future are going to become obsolete. We don't even need to harvest stem cells that bring into the question the ethical concerns that the current way of doing so does now. With just form, those geometrics that I showed you, we can quite literally put a stem cell, meaning we can literally put a cell that we can take and we can actually entrain that in a geometric case of whatever type of shape that we want, because that shape is actually what is going to tell that cell how to grow up and what to become. It could be as simple as literally the tweaks of geometry because form is going to instruct function, right? The literal shape of your organs determines the way that they function. The shape of your cells, the shape of a virus. In fact, what determines a virus is the way that actual geometric shape forms. And so the future is actually going to be using this if they let them. Not my opinion. These are, again, all studies and research that I take out of the leading establishments or the authorities in the field, right? The ones that are allowed to say things about science and have them, be held in regard or held them be true. So if anybody's ever looked at you weird whenever you've talked about geometry and the cells, crystals, etc., well, that many people might be having those conversations and not really truly understanding the merit of them. The basis for that is not woo at all. That brings me to the number one thing that I want to stress today, or perhaps not the number one thing, but the number one most overlooked thing that you can think about if you're having issues and you can't get to the bottom of it. It's a whole new way of looking at something that, again, simplicity is where it's at. Who's familiar with insulin resistance here? Let's see. Put a 1 in the chat if you are familiar with what insulin resistance is. Hi, Shauna. Why is structured water beneficial? We'll see if we can get into that today. Actually, I would love to answer that question. In 111. Oh, yeah. So many of you are all familiar with that. Okay, perfect. So you will get this analogy. So I used to actually be a diabetic in my early 20s. Not that genetics are everything, but again, that's part of your hardwiring. So it does kind of matter, right? I mean, even with the best software, if you're working with like the iPhone from the first generation, it's a little bit different than the generation of iPhones released today, right? At the same time, it's that software that even allows you to use it. So, my genes weren't the best. And when I kind of finally came of age and got a job and went out with my friends and discovered the standard American diet, I got acne and gained some weight, and a couple years into it, I was diabetic. So that kind of also was part of my initial journey in having to fix things, because I had to fix my blood sugar to fix my acne. That's another secret root cause, but we'll get to that. So long story short, insulin resistance and, being a diabetic is something that I was intimately familiar with. And my genes were just literally 6 out of 6 of the ones that we know we can measure that have to do with carbohydrate metabolism. I had both from both parents inherited, like the worst versions ever. So I was maxed out as far as like who can really kind of tolerate that, right? So I was not the person to be messing around with that kind of standard American diet. Now, as more and more of us are becoming, challenged in the blood sugar area, insulin resistance is becoming this household name. But insulin is not the only thing that you can become resistant to. Anything. That includes thyroid hormone. That includes things like norepinephrine, histamine, etc. So when something is high in the body, instead of saying, this is high, I have a problem where I'm overproducing something, why are we actually overproducing something? What happens when somebody does not pay attention to you or somebody is ignoring you? You raise your voice, right? Hello, 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 right? That's what your body does as well. So when you have a hormone that's actually high, when you're producing something in excess, even inflammation, guess what? That's your body feeling as though somebody's not receiving the message, somebody's not checking the box, so it's gonna keep throwing it your way. The same way that insulin is going to create more and more of itself, because it's saying this is not an efficient process. So the more I make, at least through that little siphon hole, at least maybe some more of this is going to come through and I'll get what I need. But if you're familiar with insulin resistance, you'll know that more insulin doesn't make it better. What does it do? Makes it worse, right? So the same thing can be happening with your thyroid hormone. The same thing can be happening with histamine. And we're actually going to get to talking about histamine in a moment, because I have a whole new outlook on, for those of you who identify with being histamine intolerant, I believe that it is histamine resistance, but we'll get to that. I won't jump ahead too far. Case in point, it's not just what you have, but how you use it. And if you aren't able to use something, then it really doesn't matter anything else that you're going to do, because your body is never going to stop that message. And here you are attacking the effect, right? Not understanding that there's a reason why that it's trying to deliver the message. There is a good and a not good portion to every single thing in the body. It has to be that way to have some checks and balances. It just depends on what portion that you're getting stuck that will give you the symptom set that you will. So this is actually known as receptor site resistance, okay? If you notice in this little picture or actually video animation to the right, these are two cells. This is pretty much kind of the cartoon version of what it'll look like. So whenever that you're actually having, let's say, thyroid hormone, histamine, et cetera, they've got to come together and they've got to lock, right, to be able to pass this information, just like you see here. So you could have, let's say thyroid hormone is on the left, you could have plenty of it and your blood is coming out fine. You've got, all the little thyroid hormone guys in the world that you need. But when it comes time to this handshake, they just can't get it together. And so that information transfer and the chemistry that follows that doesn't happen. So not only does it go where it needs to go, which is in that cell to the right, to be able to have all the metabolic information and function and support it needs to do its job, it's going to actually go other areas. So then maybe that goes into a blood vessel, right, instead. And now the blood vessel is like, wow, this is some excitatory information. Cool. And it starts growing. And then you're like, why am I getting all of these cherry angiomas? What is up with that? Information in the wrong destination. That's a perfect example. Not just cherry angiomas, for example, but in many things. Maybe you're starting to get excessive melanin. It could be a lot of other things. You're asking stimulation in metabolism that's supposed to go one area to not be paid attention to in another, right? That's not going to happen. Your body's very observant. So receptor site resistance is something that we actually screen for at Root Cause Clinic. It's one of the number one things I see as a fix where that people have tried everything. Not to say that it's an easy fix, but once we're aware of it, there's just so much we can do that if people don't understand that that is a possibility for them, that they go needlessly around in circles suffering whenever there really is an explanation for the reason why a wide variety of people are having issues, especially endocrine issues, because this relationship here is not happening. And there's many reasons why that won't happen. And we talk about that in the course in depth. I want to cover a lot of subject material today, so I won't spend too much time going into that. But if you cannot handshake here at the cells, then ultimately whatever comes up in your blood work, whether you have what you need or not, it doesn't matter because you don't use it, okay? And in fact, it can have unintended effects, just like we said. So getting into the histamine resistance hypotheses, what is this? Some of you who are already part of our frequency fam here at Root Cause Clinic probably got to see a IG live that we did with one of our clients. And so this was somebody who was on medical leave for 7-8 years. He was a pilot formerly, and he got sick with Lyme disease, and upon which he went through the infection portion, got rid of all of that. And after, he just was never able to shake the reactivity of the immune system. He was forever reactive to everything. I mean, if he looked at a blueberry, that's it. He was going to turn red, right? So he did the same thing as many of all of you probably. I can't eat this, can't eat that, special diet, don't put this, like forget coffee. Walking to the mailbox, his nervous system was so dysregulated, he would struggle to go to the mailbox, not a mental anxiety, a physical. He couldn't understand why peripheral vision would just trigger him into hyperventilation. And here he is thinking like, I don't understand why I'm acting like this. I don't cerebrally feel or identify with this, but my body is telling me something different. So what was happening with Patrick, and this is why that the technology that we have is able to help us truly cut the middle between symptoms and the source of the symptoms, because up until what I'm about to tell you, the model out there in medicine was, if you have a histamine problem, eat low histamine foods, make sure you take things to help break down histamine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Take the enzymes, take all the quercetin, everything to help you with all the effects of it. But did anybody ever ask why the body keeps making so much histamine to begin with? Okay, maybe you have infections, you have other things. And if you haven't addressed that, then go look at that, because that very well could be valid. But if you've done all that, if you've been on 3 PICC lines for a year, for goodness sakes, I think you've killed about everything you can. So I don't think that that's the problem anymore. What we found on Patrick's scan is that while that his histamine levels overall systemically were high, which was corroborated in his blood work, that said it was high too. And that's kind of a no-brainer. The guy was turning lobster red every other moment. But when I looked in his scan for his gut, right, these add-on scans that we're going to go through in the course, it showed that it was low. When I looked in the nervous system scan, it was low. So the body's perspective there is, I don't have the histamine that I need. What are you guys talking about? So what was going on is that the histamine was not able to handshake like we just showed. Histamine's not all bad. Nothing is that nefarious in the body. Again, histamine is important for your digestive processes. It's important to be able to release your gastric acid. It also is involved in a lot of neurological processes, and it's involved in what's called chemotaxis. Chemotaxis tells your immune system on a scale of 1 to 10, this is a 2, this is a 4. Oh gosh, this is a 7. If you lose that ability, right? Or if we raise the voice of that ability, now something that should be a level 2 is always a level 10 indefinitely. That's a problem, as you might imagine. Okay. So because we weren't having that handshake to deliver histamine, both the good parts and the parts that would be inflammatory, this just built up in the system, right? It built up in the system, and this histamine was aggravating everything else. And it was going to continue to do so, no matter how many enzymes, no matter what else we threw at it, because it wasn't being heard. It said, I'm going to keep doing this till I can check the box. What do you mean you didn't get my delivery? Now, once that we actually finally help sensitize his receptor, which is the whole opposite way of thinking of the medical paradigm, guess what? The histamine production started to normalize because it goes, oh, okay, cool. You finally got the message. Not only do we get the message, we can regulate the good functions that histamine is supposed to do, because guess what? Over amounts of histamine can look very similar to the tissues starving from histamine. Kind of like how hypo and hyperthyroid can look very similar, right? It's a fine line. So fast forward to today, I worked on the receptor site resistance using frequency. We did peptides. We did what are also some stem cell activators, not actual stem cells, but they are specific peptides that activate your own stem cells, as well as frequencies that do that. Patrick was able to return to work as a pilot with the major airline after being out of work for 8 years. He almost lost his entire career, okay? Because you can't go back to work, all right, and wing it, pun intended, as a pilot. You have to pass a physical. You have to be able to command that plane. It is a life or death matter, right? And he's back to work. And he does not have to appease and take this and take that and take this and take that. He can eat airport food now. He can have coffee. He can have tequila, for goodness sakes. Why? Because we actually allowed the body to be heard in this matter. So whenever, again, we have a symptom, don't ask, why is this, happening in the way that this is some sort of route that the body took, to purposely annoy you or, create problems for you. It was a better solution than the alternative. And you have to wonder, why would the body think this is better than? That's how we solve our problems. To close this, I didn't just think out of nowhere, oh my gosh, this is the solution, everybody has it wrong. No, the data showed that to me, and all I did using our system is match that up and say, how could this explain this? It provoked me to look for the information, and I had the information at that point to be able to change the situation. That is what a system does for you. Issues in the tissues, another one of my favorite subjects. So reacting terrible to everything, right? We just talked about that. At the cellular level, if you can't lock or entrain, if those cells can't come together, which looks like a physical process, and it is, they literally do come together. But again, what animates chemistry? It's physics, right? The literal magnetic pull and the forces that bring them to do that, periodic table of elements organized by atomic number, the way that they're going to behave comes down to that atomic level, right? How I take from you and you take from me, and we all become, together to come as molecules in matter. So if you're reacting terrible to everything, especially drainage, if you're allergic to everything, SIBO won't go away. Let's have a talk. First of all, sometimes taking things internally is not enough. Sometimes if we have stuff that's happening, especially from the outside, we need to have an outside-in approach. There's no substitute for touch, right? We know that out the womb even, that touch is crucial. And we see that in studies as far as the formational development of how we actually end up turning out. My theory is that as children are born, we're this kind of pristine, not yet crystallized, we're not yet hardened, right? Literally or figuratively, if you will. So the mom who has went through this is the version of the regulation for the child until that the child can kind of thicken the skin a little bit. And it seems like it's metaphorical that we make up these things, but Literally, when we talk about things like sound health, you just saw that picture of the cell, right? In the song it makes. So think about ancient man's tongue and the words that he put together and that he chose. Perhaps there was a lot more wisdom to that than we give any credit for. Tissues and touch. So touch can be a really good way of helping. We're going to get more into that as we especially get into like kind of some of the emotional talk today. But laser can be one of my favorite ways to deal with anybody that's having any type of outwardly projected reactivity. And that is because we're actually going in and delivering the frequency in the laser through the skin, right? Through the dermis, through the tissues. And so they're the ones that firsthand get that message, and it's given exactly where we need it. Peyer's patches, let's talk a little bit about this. So these are some lymphoid follicles that we have in the mucous membrane of your small intestine. What do they do? These help obviously with drainage in the bowel, right? They monitor and mobilize our immunological response. And if you see here, there's a bunch of little microfolds, and those are meant and aimed to create surface areas so that we have more space to do our immunological functions. And this is where it really matters, because what this does is it siphons away a lot of those immunological processes away from the digestive processes. So we're allowed to focus this kind of chemistry and this kind of physics action over here, while taking the stuff that's a little bit different in the way we have to act into a whole different area within the actual small intestine. If we do not have the tissues intact, right, if that geometry that we just showed isn't the way it's supposed to be, then we can't keep or sequester that information there. So that information becomes one with everything else that we're trying to digest. So how do you think that goes for the immune system in the gut whenever that the immune system of the fight and the immune system of the food hang out together, cross messages? And then we wonder why somebody has this kind of an allergy and they react to this, they react to that, because the same portion of our health that's saying, I am the micromanager, and then we're eating microbes all played together. What do you think is going to happen? The proteins that it sees at that time are all fair game to say, you know what, like you don't look very good here either, and you don't look very good here either, because who's doing the you don't look very good should be in his own corner, should be in his own area, but he's not now. He's unleashed to bully everybody else. So you can do drainage and you can do, all these other things and detox, but if you can't contain that, if you don't have the ability for the cells and the tissues to move that fluid constructively, coherently, you aren't going to move it in the wrong way. That's going to be a problem. And you're going to react. In fact, you might even stay stagnant and trap that inside. Stepping into nature. So part of the big inspiration for the Physics Meets Physiology course is my background is as an agriculture scientist. That's my first initial training. And so I have always been inspired my entire life by looking at how humans fit into the whole equation of things. When I went to naturopathic school, I thought, I don't have the background. I have a science background, but I didn't take the typical pre-medical type of background that most people would. I learned the anatomy and physiology and all of that as a crash course going into those studies. But in hindsight, I thought I couldn't have picked something better to study going into that, because it allowed me to see human beings as a part of all of that equation, as opposed to some sort of separate system. And especially in environmental medicine, and seeing the connections between diet, the cycles of, the earth, and even the cosmic sphere of things, how that affects the human being and the software systems, especially. Stepping into nature equals stepping into nature's software. There's a reason why that we're designed to work in sequence with it, receive our information from it. As is above, so is below. Absolutely. So in the course, here's just another screen, just to kind of give everybody, whether we have people looking for just the functional, tell me some sort of outside the box way that I can get better, the cool geeky stuff, all of the above, right? So what you're seeing here is lightning. Lightning is what is known as a fractal. What is a fractal? Well, in nature, we have repeating patterns so that we can actually have efficiency in delivering, again, the information that we need to in the most efficient or, least energy, the most energy efficient, least wasteful way, right? So here's lightning. And on the left, you have a tree, a branch. On the right, you have blood vessels. Do you notice any patterns? When I said nature has one language, one system, she does. We just fail to recognize it. This brings us to the Mandelbrot set. So this is pretty much what is kind of most spoken about when we talk about fractals, because Mandelbrot put together all the mathematics for everything. Now, if you take the physics meets physiology course, I'm not going to put you through pages and pages of calculations, don't worry. But if you'd like to be able to cite this course and know that, while people may not agree with your opinion after it, they'll not be able to disprove it. So there are always links to the proofs, the mathematical proofs and all the geeky science stuff, but it's not essential to have to go through all that, do all that to apply the benefits of the understanding of everything. And as you'll see here, that brings us into emotions, and we can't really talk about emotions without the environment or the relationships that are attached to them, right? If we are looking at our emotional health and we're trying to do it alone and just think from a soul perspective, then you're never really going to get the results that you're looking for. It's imperative to understand how you fit into your environment. The top 5 people that you're spending time with are going to be influencing your energetic environment, right? I mean, for goodness sakes, you ever seen the pictures of how people begin to look like their dogs? How spouses will look like each other after, 20, 30 years of marriage? That's because our environment influences us, literally. So one thing I found very interesting is that many people, if you ask them, and in fact, let's go to the chat and let's pull you all first and see what your opinion on this is. Who's heard about all of the different right and left brain kind of differences? And what are your stereotypes that you've heard about that? Have you heard that the right brain people are this kind of people, left brain people are this kind of people, as though that it's like one or the other, and this portion of the brain allows you to do these kind of things, and this portion of the brain allows you to do this? What have you heard? Right brain is artistic and left brain analytical. That's pretty much how it usually gets summed up. We teach about in the course how that's kind of a partial truth, but not in the way that many people think it is. Let's talk a little bit about that. So essentially, there was a study, and many of you might be familiar with the right brain controlling the left portion of the body, the left brain controlling the right brain, or the left brain controlling the right portion of the body. They did a study where that they actually put some caps on pigeons so that they could block their ability to use both hemispheres and just kind of test and see what would happen whenever that they would allow them to just use one or the other. What they found is that when they would cover one side, that they were asking the pigeons to do a task, right? They had trained these pigeons to look at a monitor the same way that I'm looking at you, and to be able to peck on the monitor when they saw a human, and they would get food if they did this. And so they had been trained that when they saw a human that they would peck and they'd get food. So what they did is they said, okay, let's see if there's any difference between how these hemispheres will be able to complete this task. By covering the right portion, right, so that they were not actually able to use the right brain, that affected the experiment differently than from covering the left portion. What they found is that these pigeons would not peck on the screen if they scrambled everything, meaning if they had scrambled a nose here and an eye here and a lip here, if it was up to the right brain to make that decision, the right brain said, this is not a human. What do you mean? This is not a human. The organization of this information is not a human. But the pigeon continued to peck if it was up to the left brain, because it didn't need that information to be organized. All it said is, I just need the bits of the information. Here's a nose in this corner and there's a lip over there. That's good enough. This is a human. So together, those hemispheres are allowing us to have information and then order to the information. They both matter, right? Now, men and women actually have differences in the way that they organize information. There's literal biological reasons why, as far as more blood flow can get directed to women's right side of the brain. So biologically, literally, we have a bit more superior action there. And as you'll note here, women have actually more empathy-oriented type of ways that we approach situations, and men have more action, right? And I'm sure we can all note that we've seen that, not that everybody is a stereotype, but as a continuum, women are going to display that generally more so. And there's reasons why. It comes down to the way that we are wired. It's not just a socially cultural thing, but literally a biological expression, a biological need in the way that, our software is designed to run, right? So in kind of expanding upon that, we can also look at emotions, right, that are geared on one side of the brain or the other. It doesn't mean that both hemispheres don't participate in the full emotional experience. That would be crazy to think otherwise, because of course, the entire brain, the entire body is going to be involved. But when we really look at the right and left side of the brain, we see that neural emotions linked to approaching and engaging with the world, like happiness, pride, anger, etc., occur on the left side, right? While that emotions associated with avoidance, like disgust and fear, are housed on the right. And this is actually, by MIT graduate and professor of human development at Cornell University, Dr. Casantos. So we are showing, in some of the best universities that absolutely we can track emotional patterns. It has, again, certain efficiencies in the ways it likes and the routes it likes to take in the biology of the human being. Now, these are emotions, base emotions, such as what we said, anger, disgust, pride, etc. But human beings have a higher continuum of emotions, we'd agree, right? There's plenty more where that came from. And so the interference that creates just with this in the brain that we're able to substantiate, I want you to extrapolate that and think about how that looks in the whole body. We gave the example yesterday that nobody would deny if somebody gets angry, their blood pressure may go up, right? So feelings are absolutely integrated into our flesh. So when it comes down to kind of thinking about our two portions of our brain, it's not really just what they do, but how they do it. Our left brain is the quick action and mechanistic portion, right? The right brain is the correct context and the meaning. Literally, even your left and right brains represent software and hardware approaches, Newtonian and quantum approaches in their own right. It's not that they're different. There's different strategies, right? Different systems. Let's actually see who's wired in what way. Let's see. Which is the longer line? Do you think that the longer line is the first line or the second? Let's go into the comments and see. I'll give you all a moment to answer for whoever would like to participate. Ah, Elle, you're onto something. We have quite a bit of people who have not yet been shaped by the city slicking ways of modern culture. So those of you who saw these lines as being equal, you are correct. Your eyes will play an illusion for you because we have learned to organize information now differently based on right angles and buildings and cities, etc. So our brains have literally reshaped themselves to now be that left box, deconstructed type of way of looking at things, as opposed to seeing the full picture. Now, if you go into Germany and ask the same question, pretty much everybody got the same answer, which was, yeah, the bottom line is longer. You took the same question and you asked to a bunch of tribal people that are living the same way that they've lived for thousands of years, they all got it right. They said they're the same because the context of them being able to put the information together, right brain and left brain, is actually more intact. It hasn't been shaped from the environment the way that we've all been shaped by really seeing nature under a totalitarian rule. And now we've actually changed the way that we see information. So quite literally changing our form and then changing the function, right? Which we saw down to the cellular level with all of that geometry. So for those of you who actually said they're the same, you'd be great hunter-gatherers still. I talked a little bit yesterday about crystallization and the continuum. That's a theory that we go through and we talk about in the theory of everything in the course, as far as how one system and one set of rules can explain everything, from literally cosmology all the way down to cytology, which is the study of the single cell. So if you've ever heard of live blood analysis, There are these things that are referred to as symplas, which will come up, and they're almost like these holographs, and they can literally look like organs in the body and a bunch of other things. And it's not physically there. It's literally because of the light that they're using to do that, that it creates like this hologram. The same way you could see a hologram and it could look like somebody's performing, or that they make you believe somebody's right there in front of you. So sometimes you will see what are called symplas, and we do talk about that in the course as well. But what you're looking at right here isn't a symplas. This is actually a real cell, a cell that they've observed over time in somebody, obviously, right, with the plight of worry. You can see on the left side, the earlier stages here, where it looks pretty devoid of energy compared to what a healthy cell would be, where it'd be, bright and vibrant. And then if we look on the right, as time passes, there's literally a crystalline continuum that continues to transpire until that this, calcifies almost, right? It becomes hard and brittle. And we can think of that again, metaphorically, right? Figuratively, and or literally. When we think about how we harden our hearts, I mean, that's even a phrase that's used, in the Bible. And I don't think that there's any type of coincidence in literally what it means, because if you understand the way that the continuum works, that crystallization, that is the actual process, right? The creation, the apex, and the descendants from that, as we crystallize and we become so hardened that we actually break apart. So we talk about sentiment, sediment, think about that. The longer that we actually allow sentiment to become static, if it's not a beneficial one, a life-giving one, then look what it does. It becomes sediment, right? So the case in point here is that it's not about the information so much as how that information is organized. Blood work will show you the end product of organization. That's valid. I mean, obviously, if there's things that are off, like you want to know about that, but we show the process. And that's really what you need, right? That's what you need to understand if you want to do something about it. We talked a little bit about this earlier. So for those of you who joined us a bit after that, this is our test kit option. As far as testing with RCC, you do get this mailed to your house, and it's an in-home experience. You mail this back with prepaid shipping to us. We process that in the lab, upload your results. You meet with your provider. Here is the tincture, which has our stabilized frequencies that we transfer with the superconductor. We also offer in-home laser therapy, really great for anybody that's having type of issues in the tissues. If your cells aren't locking, if you aren't reading things, if you have receptor site resistance, et cetera, misfolded proteins, all of that, the laser is really great. It's a more, even though it is not a physical, because we're using light therapy, it's an outside in approach. Understanding is the key to unhardening the heart, literally and figuratively. When we have empathy, when we have compassion, when we understand, because we can only have that if we understand, right? If we are feeling empathy, if we are feeling for somebody, it's because we have some sort of identification in them. We have a reference point to know or believe we know how that they feel. Maybe we feel the same, or we have felt like that before. And that really is the beginning of everything, because in doing that, it's hard to ever experience hate. You can't have those together at the same time, can you? Right? A balanced heart equals a balanced body. And let me show you the living proof. So this here is an actual study as far as the energy distributions that we see and oxygenation throughout the body whenever that subjects were provoked to feel specific types of feelings. And you'll see here that anger, we get heated, right, up at the top, but yet we are so absent and devoid from the bottom. You can see what fear looks like, what disgust looks like. You can see what happiness looks like. Happiness looks pretty good, right? And look where that's emitting from. Here, right? Heart. Where else? Mind, right? Because true happiness is a meeting of the mind, our thinking, our consciousness with how we feel in our heart. We try to choose between both of those in today's society, right? It's either we feel or we think. But we all know that it's a left brain society. So feeling is kind of like, you're supposed to be a thinker, right? Feeling is like, maybe. It's okay if it's been filtered through the thinking mind. Well, this picture doesn't agree with that. Sadness. right? Now we start getting into some of this blue coloring, which denotes a cooling, right? Cooling is hardening, condensing. It's crystallization, lack of circulation, lack of life force, right? Hardening, brittleness, and we actually start going down. We come up from this apex of life and then we come down from it. Surprise. Now I'm going to come back to this one in just a second. There's a reason why. Anxiety, what love looks like. Happiness, true happiness actually looks even better than love, right? Love can still be attached to ego is why. What do you love? Depression, geez. No wonder why when we're depressed, we literally feel dead, right? That's one of the number one things that's said. I feel dead inside. Well, they're not joking. Contempt. We are literally overcome with darkness. Pride. A division between contempt and an over-agitated state. Shame. Why do people not look you in the eyes? Why doesn't even your dog look you in the eyes when he poops under the piano? Right? Look at where that we feel that shame. We feel it in the eyes. You're lying to somebody. You have shame. You have guilt about something. It's hard to look somebody in the face, right? Look at envy. Now let's go back to this, neutral, right? Neutral means indifferent or to ignore, to not be paid attention to. I bet you would never guess that this, of all the types of different states, would actually reflect the seemingly worst outcome. It's because it's not to exist, essentially. It's not to have meaning. And then when I talk about the need to have purpose and meaning in life, he who has a why can deal with most any how. This is the proof, and this is why that it's important to take this into consideration, because what pills are going to overcome this? What therapies can we use to overcome this? I know it's hard to live life like this all the time. We're not meant to be living in this state all the time with all the interferences that we have. We're not perfect. We get that. But there's two approaches in life. We can either learn how to float and to surf on those waves of interference, or you can fight, or you can sink. The waves are going to come. It's about how you want to deal with them. And there are ways that are smoother than others. And for that, I look to nature. If we have the little nimble reed and we have the wind, that reed is going to bend, it's going to give, it's going to work with the energy and allow that to work to its advantage. It's not going to fight. We see what happens when there's a fight. The proud oak tree snaps. Keep that in mind for yourself. Don't be unable to become humble enough to realize that you're a human, that you feel, and that the feeling is just as important as the thinking mind, if not more important. The fault of the thinking experience, the fault of consciousness, the fault of the mind, the brain, is that it's a filter, right? The heart feels without a filter. We have it backwards. We think that is the fault of the heart, is that it has no filter. But the brain is the filter. So keep this in mind here, all right? We're going to go to another slide and look at something else pretty interesting. Here on the right side, this is actually the work of Dr. Emoto. You may or may not have heard of him. How many of your children have ever had those talk nice to an apple, talk mean to an apple type of experiments in school? Maybe you've done them with your children. A few years back in RCC, we actually had this kind of social media little contest where we engaged our audience to do this at home and to share their results as well. On the right, the very top right here, you'll see, was spoken words of love. It was spoken, thank you, you are beautiful, I love you, okay? And these are the rice that were all put in the containers on the same day. The middle representation of the rice was told things like, I hate you, you're evil, die, terrible things, right? The third one was told nothing. It was ignored. So we would normally associate bad with being bad. It's the top of the iceberg as far as bad as you can go. It's the worst thing, right? The worst thing is not negative interference. The worst thing is no interference, because no interference means death. Interference is energy, and you can have good or bad energy, right? We all know people who don't care and they just want publicity, whether good or bad. So there's still energy there, maybe warped, but no energy is the worst thing. So when human beings don't feel purpose or meaning or acknowledgement, as you see here in the third picture, that's mold, that's decay, that's death. Now let's go back and let's look at this in a little bit different way. If somebody makes you feel like you don't exist, you quite literally have manifested that. Your energy compared to this, yeah, it has subsisted. So Dr. Emoto took this experiment to say, as much as, we want to be a perfect parent, have perfect relationships, and never say something we regret. Okay, that's kind of hard. But if we could, look, as much as we can control that situation, our thoughts, our minds, our feelings could produce a drastically different outcome, right? At the same time, healthy aggression and the real waves of interference of the world are things that we have to learn how to work through. They're not necessarily 100% bad, right? It's how we deal with them. But ignoring our children, right? Ignoring them, ignoring our partners in our relationship, ignoring ourselves, that is the worst thing that we can do. Ignoring your emotions would be the absolute worst thing you could do. And I've just shown you. See, you don't have to have pages and pages of physics calculations to be able to take away the benefit. You have eyes, you just saw what I saw, right? These are studies. These are not things that we just made up or drawings. This is not from, again, Uncle Ray's Shaman Journal of Medicine from, North Carolina. Not to say that, hey, some good stuff can't come out of there, but this is real stuff that the science has already been done for you with the scientists. You just have to understand how to use that, right? And if you're here for the functional reasons of what do I do? How do I get better? That's good enough. In some of my classes, I had to take some high-level math. And I was very fortunate because I had some professors who had a realistic point of view. And that was that unless we really wanted to grow up and become some theoretical, physicists or, mathematicians and be the shapers of those formulas, then spending all of our time doing all of the calculations and understanding every single bit of that for application maybe wasn't as necessary as we thought, because in the real world, we were going to have a calculator, right? Or a software or Excel. So the focus there was to learn how to do that. I'm not saying that at some level this doesn't matter. It does matter. It matters for the people writing them. But you don't have to do all of that to apply it, right? And I think that's the biggest misnomer anybody can have, is that they look at that world and they think, if I didn't create that, or if I can't do all that, I can't use that. That's not true. If it's truly a universal truth, you can use it, because it should be simple if it's true. This is a system that we have simplified to be approachable and understandable, but it shouldn't be any less profound because of that. One system, one set of rules that you can apply each time, every time, all the time. And that brings me to my second point. Let's see how I'm doing on time. Oh, okay. The kidney connection, another area you're going to want to look. In Chinese medicine, the kidneys are really our true source of what is called essence, right? And from their essence, literally is almost like a little crock pot that gets turned into what's called qi, which you have probably heard of before. That's our life force or our energy. And so the kidneys will actually dictate the yin and yang status of the rest of the organ systems of the body. So many times, whenever that we're having issues, Chinese medicine is such a go-to, and you've probably heard of individuals before that no one else could help them, and Chinese medicine helped them. Because maybe all these other areas were just the decorations, right? Like we've talked about, that was just where the things were coming through in the surface tension. Fertility issues benefit massively from Chinese medicine because they will support the kidney. And the kidney in Chinese medicine is associated with our reproductive health. It is associated with the formation of the fluids of the body. It is associated with many things. In fact, there's what's called the Sea of Marrow, where the constitution of the kidneys, which forms the marrow, which is considered not just to be the bone marrow as we think of it in Western medicine, but up until the cerebrospinal fluid. And this was considered to be quack stuff, just a handful of years ago. And this was written a couple thousand years ago. Well, now, as you can see, we have studies that actually have proven that to be true. We've literally been able to see that bone marrow can cross from the skull and actually go in to rectify the brain, when before they thought that this was a blood mechanism that was actually doing this. So your neurological symptoms could be coming from the kidney. We've learned yesterday that it could be because maybe the kidney doesn't rein that heart back in, and the heart sends all of the messages with that thump to the cells, who thump, and the thump order is one of fear. So we may look to the kidney for certain things like fight or flight responses. We can look literally for neurological responses, such as with brain fog. Many of you have probably heard about some of the injury to the kidney that has been transpiring with some of the inoculation issues that have been going around. Sorry, everybody. I have somebody getting a tree service across the street here, fortunately. This has had a major impact with brain fog, right? And some people are taking things that are supposed to help with circulation or with brain fog, et cetera, and it's not actually helping them. Some of these people we've given Chinese medicine to, and that has been what has lifted the veil for them, because we're looking at a deeper level. We're looking at these connections, which later and more progressively we're able to honor and be able to prove with modern day medicine, but which have a much more formative basis. How would we know to go about when to use Chinese medicine and when not to? It can come up on the scan. So instead of just coming up as wherever you might have your symptoms, such as stress in the neurotransmitters or stress in the nervous system, you may see the kidney bladder meridian come up. You may say, well, I've never had a bladder problem and my kidney markers are fine. I don't even understand why this would come up. The least place, I would think to look. But we go ahead and we give you that constitution for the kidney and the bladder meridian. And then we find that you improve your symptoms. Again, we're not psychics. We didn't just dream this out of nowhere. We looked at the data and we chose to pay attention to the data, believe the data, and back engineer the data to explain your symptoms. You'll see here on the left, we have an illustration for the kidneys, the kidney essence, as I've talked about, with marrow, the spinal cord, and the brain. This is an illustration reflecting thousands of years of belief from the Chinese medicine system. And now we believe we're just ever so smart because we've been able to come back and recreate that and show you on the right what that literally does look like, right? With the fact that activation of microglia, neuroinflammation, and some of these neuronal activities that we know can become distorted whenever we have some of these issues, proven to have relation with our bone marrow. So when a bone marrow or when a bone marker for that matter might come up on your scan and you said, well, my bone density scan is fine. I have no aches and pains. I'm 70 years old and I'm transplanting trees, fig trees that are 20 years old and I have no problem. So I don't understand why that's coming up. Again, we can do that reverse engineering. Skin flora. If we're having any type of issues with the skin, whether it be acne, whether it be rosacea, etc., just like we talked about the microbiome yesterday being dependent on the voltage of the gut. If we don't have the proper environment, we can't subsist that population. The same thing for the skin. So the voltage of your epithelial tissue, that top layer, that's the flat layer, controls so much in the way of what is allowed to colonize and what is not. Demodex. About 50% of rosacea cases are actually due to Demodex, not because that, is this really loud here, guys? I'm so sorry. Are you all able to hear all this tree stuff going on in the background? You're okay? We're good? All right, great, because this thing is so loud over here on my end. All right, perfect. Amazing. Great. All right. Oops, let me go back. Okay, so back to the Demodex, right? So I want to make sure I try to wrap this up so we can get to question time. About 50% of rosacea cases completely resolve. I mean, literally, they go back to normal, like as though this never happened, based on addressing the Demodex. And Demodex are essentially mites. I know you don't want to hear that these little creepy crawlies are on your face, but it is a part of life, okay? And they actually do good things. They break down keratin in the pores so that you don't clog that up with sebum and get acne or have other issues. They do a lot of good things. It's a cycle of life, but we can have some issues that can actually send that into overdrive. People that are not using their iron properly, hemochromatosis individuals, which is why rosacea is thought to affect people from Nordic type of bloodlines more, and you kind of tend to associate the rosacea with more of those Nordic bloodlines. What's the real true cause of that, or what's one of the true precipitants to allowing that to happen is the way that they metabolize iron. And as iron can build up, that can actually feed some of these colonizations in excess. It's the same thing as that candida. If you don't have proper blood sugar, if you're diabetic, you're insulin resistant, if sugar is outside the cell, it's not in the cell. If it's outside the cell, it's a buffet time for the candida in the body. And so you might be trying to kill candida. You may be trying to kill things and nothing responds. Well, then, yeah, they're not going to ever go any further than that because every day you give them a buffet, right? So with Demodex, we don't just treat what's going on with what's, an antifungal or an anti-mite type of therapy, because what we're going to do is create more inflammation, right? We're going to get an attack back, a response back from not only the Demodex, but our own inflammation and our own immune system. So what we have to do is we have to work on changing the voltage and the terrain of the tissue so that it's no longer compatible for that Demodex. And when we do, the rosacea goes away. Right? Actually, if you look in our testimonials, there's a couple before and after pictures of individuals that did come to us with very severe rosacea, both men and women. And after using the frequencies that we had to kind of help reset the voltage and the cellular level in the epithelial tissue for the most part, they didn't have that problem anymore. Because it really wasn't about the Demodex. They did overgrow and they did create an immune system reaction, the vascularization, all of that, but we could have killed till we were blue in the face. It would have kept being a problem, right? Until that we fixed the voltage that allowed that to quite literally magnetize in the first place. Many different inquiries about weight loss, as we've asked, what's important to you? What did you want to learn at the summit? And it's worth talking about fat tissue, period. So adipose tissue is an area that's oftentimes the take one for the team. All of the toxin exposure that we're actually accumulating will go into the fat cells. It's my theory that that's why women seem to have more of the chronic illness patterns, because for two reasons. One, our fat distribution is a bit higher and life designs it that way for many reasons. And so we accumulate more toxins outright. Women also use more toxins in the form of, self-care products. And we tend to be more canary in the coal mine because we do pack that away. And so it's kind of sequestered in the fat on the butt, for example, as opposed to going straight for those vital organs. It doesn't mean it can't get there too. But men don't have as much of that to work with. So they kind of can keep going until boom, they're sick and then they can't go. Because that little canary in the coal mine, low and slow burn in the fat tissues that can build up and give us progressive symptoms as women, they've got less of that to work with. Okay. On a second note, it also impacts weight loss. Why is that? Well, if we have toxic fat, then when your liver goes to break down the fat just to break it down, as in it's trying to break that down to lose the weight, it has two jobs to do. It has to physically actually break down the fat, and then it has to clean up all the trash while it's at it. Kind of like if you decided you were going to move into a house and then you find out the house was left, with all the furniture and a disaster inside. You showed up thinking you had the job to do this, and now it's that job and another job. So what are you going to do? Change your plans, right? Obviously. That's what will happen when you're trying to lose weight. The liver is going to say, I'm doing this work. Are you kidding me? You're going to slam me with this project right now? Whatever. You got to wait. I'm sorry. There's only so fast I can work. And so it will be tough to lose weight if you have toxic fat. You could be doing everything and anything. If you've ever seen somebody that's had gastric bypass surgery, they may have lost weight, but in their face, do they look like the definition of health, or do they look tired? Do they have circles under their eyes, their skin? And it's not just from physically losing the fat, right? It's because at that time, they have asked their body to go through a major breakdown of fat, but also the toxins associated with that fat. So you have literally slammed the body, and that is something that can cause a lot of health problems after. And if you notice people who do get the gastric bypass, they start having progressive problems after that, because they have literally had a mass exodus of the liver to be able to have to break all that fat down. Anybody that wants to lose weight, I recommend targeting your fat cells first, cleaning up your fat cells, helping the fat cells to be able to drain and to help some of those pathways first, so that when your liver gets it, it's like, cool, all I got to do is just break down this fat. It will go so much easier. We do have we have two approaches for that. You can do laser, right? And you don't have to do laser in the areas that you want to lose the fat per se. You can actually just apply this to the body, and this systemically can be taken in, because the type of tissue, it's literally almost on this Wi-Fi system. If you've ever heard of what's called germ layers, embryonically, certain tissues start the same, and then they differentiate into others later. Think of it as a mother dialect with descending dialects. And later on, all of these other cells that descended from this germline can still call home. So we may give therapy here, but the therapy in that section actually has the ability to talk to all those tissues in the body that are like in nature, even if they're not proximate, right? It's kind of like Wi-Fi communication versus being hardwired. Another thing to look at is the type of fat cells that we have, okay? Most of us these days are having these type of white fat cells that aren't exactly the best at being able to use energy. You'll see here that the mitochondrial density is lower. We also see that they store excessive amounts of percentage of energy as fat. As we get into what is known as beige or brown fat cells, we actually see that these become a lot better. They are able to use more of that energy for you, right? And store less of it as fat. So you can quite literally see how people can keep gaining weight but feel tired. And people think you're just lazy, right? But quite literally your cells, these toxic little fat cells, have changed the way that they do business, and they are keeping all of the energy as fat at your expense instead of giving it to all the cells to do all the processes that you need, right? They're saving it where they don't. There's things that we can do that can manipulate that. Now, mind you, infants and babies are going to have just a higher predisposition of the brown fat out the gate. And part of the evolution of life is that we will lose that, even if we're living in balance and all of that. But there are areas in the body that still do retain this even as adults. And if we are losing that, then we are losing the ability to have the energy at least as maximized as possible, the metabolic processes as best as possible, the way we're using insulin and the way that we're interacting with energy, ATP. So it's not just a matter of how you look in the flesh, but how you feel, right? So starting with your fat cells is where you want to begin whenever you have any type of a weight loss journey. Nature is pleased with simplicity, and don't you forget it. If there's a message that I have passed today, it's that as cool as some of this stuff looks, and you'd expect that you'd see it on some sort of a page and think this is cool, but I have no business talking about this stuff or being in this place to have these conversations. I'm not smart enough. I can't do it. You absolutely can. Because all these things that I've shared with you today, stories of back engineering, you know, it's not that this, again, was something that was on my radar. It was put on my radar. I had a system of how to make connections. If you're able to have a question and you're able to have the desire to go and get the answer, you can find the answer. Now, with what we're having at the Physics Meets Physiology course, you have the benefit of getting a ton of cliff notes ahead of the pack to kind of already know a lot of the connections that we've made that aren't readily out there. But the idea is that with the system, you can still find yet more connections if your connections are beyond that. Let me give you an example of just how this system can really blow your mind. So we had somebody come to the clinic with a chronic UTI, okay? She came to the clinic and there were a couple markers that had, urogenital bladder, et cetera, stuff like that coming up. But for the most part, it didn't have that. And so, of course, her thing was, well, I literally came to you for this issue and it's not coming up. Like, how am I supposed to believe you're going to help me? You didn't even find my problem really represented here. And that's whenever that we explained, well, you have that problem. So you don't need us to tell you that. That's kind of Captain Obvious, right? Let's talk about those other markers that are coming up that don't readily make sense to you. What were they? So we saw that there's calcium issues going in the body. We saw that the kidney was a bit overwhelmed. We saw things like parathyroid hormone coming up as imbalance. Again, her blood levels were fine because the right amount of it was in the blood. But just like we saw those little handshakes going off, they weren't going off the right way. So calcium was building up in the body. It just so happened it was building up in the urethra because the kidneys are who have to break that down, right? And as that built up in the urethra, it created almost this pumice-like deposit. And when it did that, regular, everyday, E. coli and run-of-the-mill bacteria that should just slide away through the urethra kept pegging in there. You go spill wine in a pumice stone and try to get it out, right? That's what was happening. So she could kill. So she was blue in the face. She had been on antibiotics, off and on. Finally, her cultures wouldn't even come back with a positive enough of the time, because quite literally E. coli would sequester quite obviously inside that pumice stone, the pumice deposits. And then she was actually told she should be on some antipsychotics. So that's when she did finally come to us, because at that point she was a newlywed and here she was without any recourse or any further action she could take in the medical system, right? All the blood work had been fine, the whole picture. So then when we told her that, she said, oh my gosh, you found the root cause. So I have to get rid of this calcium and what's going on? So why is my thyroid doing this? And we said, wait, that's still not it. Why? Yeah. Why is your thyroid doing this? Why is the parathyroid a problem? So then we found further that there were chemicals that were coming up for her, particularly what are called the halogen family. These are your chlorides, your bromides, your fluorides, etc. We asked her, is there some sort of reason why you might have higher exposure? Does this ring a bell? Do you use fluoride toothpaste? And she's like, well, no, I don't use fluoride toothpaste anymore. Of course I did as a kid. Only thing I can think of is that I've been a lifeguard for 15 years and I do have to be the one to dump in the bags sometimes to the pools with the chlorine. So we're dumping these big cement bags almost of chlorine every few days for, the pools. And when we dump that, what comes up? What are we breathing, right? Well, chlorine actually directly kicks iodine out of your thyroid. So fluoride in your toothpaste and chloride, this competes because of the atomic weight and it will always win against iodine. That's just the physics. It will always kick it out. You need iodine to be able to make thyroid hormone. So if you are being exposed to these chemicals and we don't have tissues that can regulate, right? Or after a while, even let's say they're good tissues, but they get broken down because of so much interference, they lose that geometry to regulate. Then we end up with the problem. But that's actually still not the full circle here. We also noted that there were markers coming up essentially for, growths and nodules. And so that's concerning. A lot of nodules in the thyroid are not cancerous and they're not problematic. But in this case, it was a deeper issue. This woman had to end up getting her thyroid removed because at that point, she had actually grown nodules and a part of one of the nodules was actually cancerous. Even then we said, well, why do some bodies respond this way, right? The nodule, as much as we think of, again, as this is a pathology, is your body protecting you because it's a better than situation. It's going to say, I don't know what I'm going to do. I cannot function without the iodine. This keeps creating a problem for me. So let me grow some tissue and grow a wall around this to try to put it in gel, to try to contain it because I'm not able to eject it fast enough. I can't prevent the interference. What can I do? I can put it in gel. Let me grow some tissue. Tissue growing is an immune response. Okay. You cut yourself, what happens? You get a scar. That's tissue that grew, right? It's the same thing here. That's an immune response. We don't like that type of an immune response, but that's the immune response that's being given for that situation to prevent something else from happening. So from having a chronic UTI or interstitial cystitis as the symptom, right, as the top of the iceberg, what was really going on? We had a lifeguard for 15 years who was dumping chloride bags that caused thyroid distress, which had caused her thyroid problems, although she didn't have it present in the way that many people do. It was affecting these tissues. Her thyroid hormone was fine. It wasn't affected. She was still producing what she needed to produce, making what she needed to make, but it wasn't getting used the right way. And so the body made a response. Tissue started growing. And this created issues for the body in other areas. And it trickled all the way down until that we had these urethra symptoms. But that was really not at all where it was at. We were able to help her, and she did not have these issues anymore. But she doesn't have her thyroid now either. We could have maybe changed that if we would have just taken a little look at the software of the body. All right. Well, that concludes our lesson today. Let's look at the chat here and let me get to some comments. We're a little over. Okay. Emily has asked, isn't our water chlorinated? It is. It is, amongst many other things. And, you know, in nature, there exist these elements. So it's not that there's, again, a complete nefarious nature to this, because, for example, matcha tea has natural fluoride. I am almost 40 years old and I have never had a cavity in my life, ever, even as a child, never. I've only had basic dental work. I get cleanings only here and there. So I have good teeth. Why is that? I believe it's because I've been a tea drinker since I've been very young. Tea has natural fluoride, but it's a fluoride your body knows how to have a handshake with. We showed that right earlier. So it's a compatible fluoride, and it's in an elemental level and percentage that my body registers with. We're creating derivatives in synthetic chemistry, synthetic software, when we use things like some of these toothpastes that have it, the man-made chemicals that go into the pools, etc. And that's not a message that we're designed to transduce. And that's where we start sending messages that kind of become a problem. Okay, everyone's root cause is different. Chlorine came up high for you. Chlorine, chloride or its derivatives can also come up if we have neuroexcitatory issues. So chloride has a lot of effect on oxytocin as well. In fact, whenever there's the birthing process for a child, oxytocin is not just the contraction kind of let's give birth portion of chemistry. It also interacts with the baby's body to help shut off this excessive type of neurological stimulation. Because once that we've grown from an embryo into a baby at 9 months, even though there's a ton more development to do, from that 9-month-old child to, let's say, a year child, 2 years old, the development is not so extensive. And so we don't need as high amount of activity or potential, energy potential from the nervous system. And so when the baby is born, that oxytocin rush actually helps to kind of cap that chapter. As we mess with the birthing process and we're using Pitocin and or we're just messing with labor period, and I'm not saying that there's not instances where that, you know, we need to be grateful for the fact that we do have the ability to intervene, but this is also messing with that process. Because again, it's the continuum, right? It goes like this, and we take an action here, and then we don't realize how we've affected something here. So it comes up also in a lot of spectrum children's reports. And that's why that sometimes almost having a diuretic type of approach can make their behavior better, because we're keeping and containing the way that that chloride ion kind of goes unchecked. Unfortunately, what happens also with some of the neuronal degradation we see with like the myelin sheath issues and some of the other stuff I've talked about, there's no barrier to prevent how much of that can come into the cell. The geometry is caved in. So there's no exterior barriers like we've seen that are protective that say, no, we filter you out. It's like this. So whoever wants to come in, it's a party. There's no bouncer. Hi, just amazing info. Wondering what laser that is. This is a 635 nanometers red light wavelength. It's coherent light in laser form. So it's monochromatic as well as coherent, which means that the frequency and the actual phase, the wave cycles are going to be the same. What it does is it goes in, and that specific wavelength, 635 nanometers, is what you want to get in to talk to the mitochondria. So it slips into the cell. And when it slips into the cell, we also have the unique frequencies we calibrate for you. So we quite literally get that message in the cell. And that's why that I like that for issues in the tissues, because it's just a very powerful way to target that response exactly where we want it. Tinctures are great, but they'll be more systemic in their effect. So if you say you want something for systemic drainage, then that's great. But if you want something specific, let's say for wound healing, you have carpal tunnel, or maybe you have a rash that we want to get rid of, or perhaps there's just any other type of issues, tissue issues, as we've talked about. Do you include toxin elimination assistance with binders as they are released from the fat and with weight? So that's a very good question. I don't think that binders are needed in every single case all the time. Definitely, when you're going to do a certain level of provocation, you want to be mindful of having binders. Binders are not also all equal. You want different binders for different things, and some people cannot do many types of binders. The reason being is that if your polarization, this charge of the cells are off, things that are also containing a charge within the binder might bind and might stay that way. Those of you who have any type of oxalate issues are usually people who don't react well to the binders. So for those people, I'm very cautious as to what kind of binders I give, and I may give them every other day or strategically, not on an everyday basis. So I don't believe that necessarily everybody needs a binder all the time. It depends on what you're provoking, for how long, etc. I also don't generally favor to be on binders indefinitely. I usually say that that's good to at least take a break from at some point. We're not designed. Remember, nature has seasons, right? You ever heard of spring cleaning? Because that's literally when nature does a lot of her revamping. So if you want to do parasite cleansing, you want to do a detox, right now is literally the best time to do it. The software of the earth is literally working in your favor. Trying to do that, for example, in winter is a bit counterproductive. You're going to herx worse. You're going to have more clearing symptoms, because at that time, the instruction, the software is rest, be conservative with energy. The harvest is low. We all tread, and even the animals think, this is the last winter I'm ever going to get through. Spring's never going to come, but spring always comes, right? So it's about understanding the cycles of everything. I don't think that being in a detox state indefinitely is our goal. I don't believe that that's what we want to do. Will liposuction help this? I am not a fan of liposuction. Let me tell you why. Because you're taking something from the body. The body has a memory. So now the body is going to say, what the heck just happened here? What went missing? And it's going to try to do something about that. So a lot of times after liposuction, you'll see distortions in the way that fat will move. And guess what will happen with many of your other fat cells? They'll say, we're missing this big chunk of fat. We got to make up for it. Well, we can't make new fat cells here, so let's just grow. And they all become bigger. Not sure if any of you saw, it's Linda, she was big in the 90s, the famous supermodel, Linda Evangelista. She went and she got this kind of laser treatment. And mind you, the cold laser is actually great, has, amazing results, but everybody's different, right? Her cells actually reacted the opposite way, and they expanded instead of shrinking, right? It's my theory that toxins and all the Botox and all this other kind of stuff had a major reason as to why, that happened. And so now she's actually expanded. So that was the way that the fat cells chose to deal with things. So, sometimes when we take those interventions, you have to be prepared for some of the risks that can go with it. Okay, let's go back to some other questions here. Oh, you can't hear the tree surgery. Good. Yes, it's like 12 palms are getting cut down right now. PCOS and kidneys always stressed, and scans always wondered why. Yes, the kidneys are a focal point. I am always supporting my kidneys. Even things such as menstrual cycles that, can be weak, or fertility issues. A lot of times that has nothing to do with the actual reproductive parts. In fact, never in my life did I think that we would be working in fertility, but we do very well in helping with what we call the bioenergetic babies here, because if you just fix the central imbalances, nature then says, okay, we're giving you the green light. You have what it takes to sustain this life and to be able to support it thereafter. It didn't have confidence in you before. That's why I wasn't letting you have the conception to successfully take off or implant. Haven't been able to focus on the whole program today due to other meetings. You hope that there will be another recording. Yes, this is actually being live streamed. Trying to hold it together. Thank you for explaining that. Wow, anyone else crying? Top-based arrow. Get into that. All right, so I think I've been able to keep up better in the comments today. Let me go up a little bit more, and then I'll see what the more recent comments are. Does this explain pain discovered being more one side of the body? Oh, I love that question. So things can absolutely happen on one side more so than the other. There is a correlation to left and right as far as negative and positive. And so even whenever we're trying to do things that will remove things from the body versus add things to the body, whether this is emotional work that we're doing, whether this is physical work that we're doing, whether that the issue is a, father issue or a mother issue, with mother issues being correlated to the left and father to the right. All of that is not without coincidence. Top of the body, bottom of the body, etc. Whether or not you have something in a left bladder meridian versus a right bladder meridian, that can give us a lot more information. So the left and the right portion of the body absolutely do factor into the equation. And many of you who actually don't get good muscle testing results, for example, you might have some distortions and you would benefit potentially with some magnet work or some different tapping exercises, acupressure, to be able to help to balance that equilibrium so that you actually do test. Or for those of you who lean to different directions instead of, the way that you're supposed to when you're being muscle tested, that's actually a distortion of the equilibrium that we can fix by doing those left-right alignments as well. What would be the cause of swallowing problems which are neurological? All blood clear, MRI? Oh, I love this question. Okay, so Patricia, that is the third wave of what we're seeing with COVID. The first wave we saw was a lot of the respiratory type of inflammation, right? The second wave we saw was a lot of gastric inflammation. That's what I got. I literally had bowel-induced bleeding. I saw my literal shedding of my intestine, right? Got on some peptides. Thank God I knew what to do, or it would have been maybe a much worse situation. The third wave seems to be pharyngeal, meaning it's taking place through here and through the throat. And so as all the body is integrated together, it's not like it just picks this type of tissue. It seems to correlate to impacting the neuromuscular function as well. Let me get some water here. And what we're seeing is that we're actually having a spasticity or a lack of the neuromuscular tone. And so this creates a gagging, or it creates a difficulty swallowing or choking effect. There's some peptides that I have really liked for that. And of course, I'm targeting the neuromuscular junctions with frequency. I like transfer factor for that, which is really great at helping to reset the immune system. It's kind of a ground zero, if you will, because many times putting a probiotic in a situation like this, it's kind of like a forced command, and we don't want to do that. You want to reset to zero is what you want. I have had individuals come to the clinic for that, though, and we are seeing success in them moving forward. And these were people that were hit pretty severe, people that couldn't even eat at some point in time. So that, I would say, is probably related to that third wave of COVID. The vagus nerve can be a part of it, for sure. Glossopharyngeal nerve, all of the innervations and things we have here. You'll see tightening in the diaphragm as well. So there's sometimes some anxiety states that, end up happening, but definitely that's a problem that we've been seeing. Catherine says, well, right brain people are the most organized thinkers. Actually, if you see societies that, as they've been successful throughout time, if you look at the left and the right brain society mix, like ancient Greeks, for example, we have in the Renaissance eras, right? Leonardo da Vinci, and all of these were right and left brain people, right? I mean, even down to the work that, he did as an ambidextrous, artist. By engaging the right brain and engaging the left brain, we come to be whole. We're right now in a very left brain dominated type of existence. And that's why sometimes we can come to the point where we're literally not making any common sense. We're just putting data and we're lacking meaning and organization to it. There's a time and a place for data. Absolutely. It's a part of the picture, right? That's kind of our survival mechanism. But the meaning and the context is very important as well. And in fact, they believe that we have this precisely so that we can eat and not get killed in the process, right? You got to focus on detail, but you have to also focus on meaning. So how can we look at, as for example, this little pigeon and peck at the pebble and be able to differentiate the pebble and make sure that we can eat, while at the same time we're seeing, is there a hawk? Is there somebody else here that's going to kill me? So it allows us to have that context of detail and meaning together, right? They're both important. All right, let's come up into real time, and then we will probably wrap this up for the day. Taylor has said, you're overwhelmed with the knowledge that I have. Like, how have you learned so much in so many things? Well, that's actually a good question. So my journey is this. I have always loved to learn. Since that I've been little, I literally was a child that would risk punishment to stay awake, not to do anything other than read my books, for goodness sakes, right? I had a condition when I was little where I would see, it was like burst of light. I would see like these almost looked like dancing atoms, if you will, or strings. And they thought something was wrong with me neurologically at first. It took me to several specialists, and I finally got a Croatian doctor that told my parents that I would, be just fine. But that was something that would follow me throughout my life, as I grew up. And so that kind of started my love of light. And I knew early on I wanted to do something with it. I didn't know if I wanted to be an ophthalmologist or, work in lasers or whatever, but that was my love of learning. I read science books as a little girl. However, I had a love for the pompous, as I call all the pomp and circumstance of science, right? I loved the hard stuff. I would look for the hard stuff. I took pride in the hard stuff. And unfortunately, that was a fault, because that really is out of ego, right? It makes us feel good about ourselves. We feel validated and smart to feel difficult, because difficult creates separation. It puts us up here and it puts other people down here. Even if we don't look at it that way and we're saying, and we like these things and we're not trying to feel that way where we separate people or put ourselves on a pedestal, but the subconscious of that, that's really what that's saying. And so in my dealings in the clinician world with the people doing the living, the dying, the suffering, and really seeing that all these subjects that we have that could provide answers are actually a lot more simple than we may think. They're made to sound very hard, and you can absolutely describe them in a very hard way, but this is not as hard as it has to be. And it made me realize that the true genius is the way that you can take something like that and make it accessible to everybody. And in making it accessible to everybody, that is really the definition of enlightenment, because that's what nature does. She's simple and she's no less elegant, right? She's efficient and she's no less beautiful. And so in coming full circle as an agriculture scientist, my journey really showed me that to be smart, right, is to be able to make something that might seem so sophisticated simple. And I wouldn't have this if it wasn't for the way that we look at things with the system that we have. It has developed myself as a clinician, because I get a set of data and I know that that has to explain what I'm going to look at on the right with the symptoms. All of these theories that I've had, the Trojan horse effect, issues in the tissues, histamine resistance, all of them have come as a result of the data and me just having a willingness and a desire to say, this person's already been to this junction and done XYZ. Yes, XYZ came up on the scan too, but I'm not going to tell her XYZ is the problem. She's been there and 100 people before me have told her that. So it's something else. So what is it? Here's these other markers on the scan. What do they have to do with the situation? It's as easy as not just having what you have already inside of you as the knowledge and using that to begin your connection making process, but go on Google and do some research. I'm not saying it's a Dr. Google substitute. What you're doing is you're going and you're saying, this came up on my scan. What does this have to do with this? What does this have to do with this? Put thymus and pineal connection, thymus pineal gland research. See what comes up. And then realize that 4 out of those 5 things make sense with your story. It's how we find issue in the tissues for people that maybe they have, let's say Addison's disease, and they don't have the typical markers for Addison's disease. Why? Because we see on their tissue, it's not even their adrenal coming up, it's the connective tissue. We see the type of tissue that's affected is causing the problem within the adrenal, but it's not an adrenal problem, it's a tissue problem. And that's why that person has the same problem in the thyroid, because there's shared tissue types there. And then you go and you read the literature and you say, well, there's a multisystemic autoimmune disease. And what's really happening here is that this is triggered because the thymus controls the autoimmune gene expression. And we start seeing a failure for that to happen. And so the places that we see in the tissues mostly affected would be the thyroid and would be the adrenals in this case. And then you see that this person is autoimmune in both of these areas. They're not just another Hashimoto's case, and they're not just another Addison's case. That's the real story. How would I ever know that? I would not know that if I didn't see those markers first and then go put the dots together. So you get the dots with what we're doing. You have to be the web. We give you a lot of information to help you to understand how to create that web, but you will always be the web, and your results will be as good as your desire is to get them. That is why that I'm preaching that you have to be the participant, you have to be the driver, not just the patient, because as much as any provider will want to help you, they do not have the ability to be there for each and every question, right? Each and every time. But it's important to consider and rule out each and every one of those questions each and every time, because one particular thing can be the deal breaker. I can't tell you how many times that somebody has told me, this probably isn't important, but, and then I think, and I'm like, that literally just solved my case, right? You may not be bringing that to your provider's attention. How would they know? And there's only so many hours in a day. So there's no substitute for you becoming the participant, the driver really, of your own journey. Angela, you are a true disciple. Oh, thank you. All right, you are a true disciple. I mean, yes, would like to know about the Healy. So here's the thing with any of the devices is that if your mother ever told you get what you pay for, that's kind of true to a certain degree, right? If I buy a $2 bottle of wine versus a $200, there is a difference, right? Now, if I'm buying a $200 bottle of wine versus a $2,000, how much more difference for that $2,000? That's where we kind of become not as price related, right? As far as the value you get. It's the type of engineering that you have going on. So in a very high quality device, think of it as doing accounting to the 8th decimal, right? Pepsi Cola doesn't round up. They're doing math to the 8th, 9th, or greater decimal, because that's millions of dollars. So they will run that to the ultimate decimal point. So those frequencies are going to be calibrated a lot more precise. It's going to be 747 hertz, 0.36586, or in whatever that we see in nature, it's going to be more precise. Something like a Healy is going to round up. It's that 747 hertz. Now, if you've never done anything energy medicine, that's a great tool. Anything is a great tool to get started, because that alone is going to be something that can help entrain and create some balance in the body. But you'll end up outgrowing it, is the thing, because it's not precise enough. That's my opinion when it comes to the devices. Those can be great if you're kind of getting started, but the specificity that you need and the exact precision is usually something better to invest in a higher caliber machine. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and empowering others to be the best advocates for themselves. Have to hop off. Have a wonderful day. What are your thoughts on the Healy? Answered that. My fatty acid panel came back very high, ordered by a dietitian, but my doctor says he doesn't know why. It's just the dysautonomia. So there's a lot of reasons why that could be happening. A lot, actually. I mean, we could look at everything from what's going on within the liver. We could look at what's going on with the bile constitution. You could look at your mineral levels. You could look at mitochondrial pathways. Those are all places to start. It really just depends on the data that I would see. But a lot of times when we have any type of issues where that we're using our bile for other things and not for fat, well, not only are you not going to get the digestion process to go down, you're not going to extract the nutrients for the fatty acids. And so they're going to go somewhere, like we just showed, right? You may have them in the areas that you don't need them and not have them where you do. I'd be willing to bet that an excessive amount of fatty acids showing up in the way that you've said means that you're empty in other areas. It's probably not going through the mitochondria and being synthesized to use as energy, because we use fat as energy too. It's probably building up everywhere on the outside. Maybe your cell isn't allowing for the proper geometrics to go through that process. Jacqueline, you're interested in peptides, write us and we can help you with that. Wondering about the panic attacks. So you've done fascia work. Yeah, so fascia work will definitely release some very vivid experiences. Also wondering why solar flares have been causing a nervous system issue in the past year. That's software, right? That's excitatory. Think about that. So now you're synced and you're linked with that, and that could be something that is exacerbating the symptoms that you are experiencing, because a panic attack is already kind of us pushing to the ultimate excitatory state. In fact, it has pushed so far, it is the collapse. If you've ever thought of parasympathetic system as something that is the good thing, right? It generally can be if we think of in the rest and digest, but beyond that, there's a second portion of that parasympathetic called the dorsal portion, and that's the shutdown mode. So there's fight or flight, and when we can't fight or flight, we freeze. And so unfortunately, when that happens in our tissues, quite literally, and it depends what portion of the trauma cycle that you actually experienced the trauma imprinted, where did somebody grab you when something happened? What were you doing? What system was engaged? What portion of the trauma did you not digest? Was it the shock of realizing it was happening? Was it the actual fight attack? Was it the aftermath, the processing? Wherever that process imprinted on you, you may be stuck in that cycle. And so you have to clear that. It's like you cannot, again, go to spring without having come through winter, right? And so that has to come to a head. That energy has to come to an apex so that, again, like I've showed you with the crystalline continuum, it can come back down. When it can come back down, the cycle can reset, and you can also use that energy in other capacities. But the very problem right now is that you are frozen. You are in the freeze state. And so you're frozen in that system, and I'd have to look at your data and, see all that to give you more details on all of that. But that's exactly what's going to happen. And now you have a solar flare, which is giving accessory stimulation. And into a person that's already in a freeze state, now it's like you've got ice that already you were trying to have come through a peg. And now you're trying to push that ice through the peg. You're putting more force there. Of course, there's going to be resistance. Of course, there's going to be a problem. Can we please talk about treating CRP? Well, that would be hard unless I know what's causing it. So see, that would be a symptom, and I'd have to look at the source of your symptom. I'd have to see what other markers or what other things I could note that I could try to connect. As a whole, there could be so many things as to why that's going on. A lot of them, again, as I've said, probably the number one thing that I see is the receptor site resistance. Cells aren't speaking to each other. They're not delivering messages. And so because messages are not getting delivered, then the message keeps getting made. And we shoot the messenger instead of saying, first of all, who's making the message and why is the message being made? A lot of times, anybody that has that kind of chronic cycle does well with us targeting the cells. We usually do well to target what's called the redox portion of the cell, which is to help essentially when your cell makes energy, it's like a nuclear reactor. There's the byproduct of the volatiles that get produced in the energy making process. And so when that happens, we have to do something about that. They have to be contained and they have to be dealt with. If you're not able to do that, we saw the firsthand how the geometry of the cell looks, and we're not able to actually organize those processes, that blows up in the cell, just the same way as a nuclear reactor can blow up and cause problems, right? So we don't want to detox you systemically. I don't want to do things to your liver, to your drainage through all these other pathways, because at the end of the day, it's going to push that through the cell to finish the job. And the cell's already closed for the day. It's not going to do that job, and we're going to make things worse. So I have to start from within the cell, but not by detoxing. Okay. I'm not scrubbing the tub. I just need to pull the drain up. So there's a difference between pulling the drain up so that the current water can drain versus I'm scrubbing and cleaning the tub. You have to pull that up first, work with the volatiles that have built up. Then you may be in a situation to go intracellular and provoke things that expedite clearing. And then if you look at the cellular level, you can look at the tissue level, and then you can look at the system level. So if the cells are coming up on your scanning, you have hormone problems, then it's a deeper problem. I have to go work on the cells that actually consist of the system that do that job, rather than push that system who can't do that job, because when it goes to hand off that baton to the cells aren't open to be able to do that job for it. So again, I'd have to know a lot more information to kind of really know what's going on. But usually for the most part, any kind of chronic issue is because the receptor sites, the handoff, if you will, of communication isn't happening. Why it's not happening can be for many different reasons. And sometimes there's things that we do have to address, like infections, toxicity, et cetera. And sometimes it's just that portion has already finished, but we never resumed and reset back to baseline. And we just have to reestablish the communication between those cells. Melissa, you came here because of a talk I did on CCN. Not currently aware of any specific issues, and my basic blood work comes back in the normal range. Should I be doing any proactively? Well, that's where what we do comes in. I always advise everybody that before they're going to go get any blood work done, one of our scans is great because it can really help cut to the chase on the blood work that you run. Especially if you're doing functional medicine testing, you're doing Dutch tests, you're doing Great Plains, all that stuff, it's thousands of dollars. You may think that you have the symptoms of mole and go run all these tests. And it's not that that's bad, but then maybe that comes back and you see that wasn't even the issue. If we have a test that's able to kind of point you in the right direction, you might out the gate see, oh my gosh, like I actually have some really, skewed dopamine levels here. What's going on? That might help you channel doing some other types of tests over others before you actually do them, decide that some of them didn't really turn out as productive as you like, and then you need yet more tests. Is there a home device frequency that you like? I like using our lasers from RCC. I like using home microcurrent. In fact, microcurrent is an amazing thing that you can do as well for anybody that has home microcurrent devices. That's also great to be able to use. I mean, not just for anti-aging, but for any type of, let's say you have rosacea, let's say you have skin issues, because the voltage, right? What you're working with the microcurrent is the voltage. And so you're delivering voltage to the cells, to the mitochondria, specifically right here in this top layer, that epithelial layer is kind of getting the charge back. It can have a better equilibrium. So something as simple as microcurrent, which is actually geared toward anti-aging and tightening the skin, can help with things like acne. You can run the microcurrent over your gut. You can run the microcurrent over aches and pains. I love microcurrent, laser. Those are all great frequency type of therapies that you can use at home. Red light, infrared. Anybody looking for really, really good device, the Quasar MD uses amber wavelength, which I think is the real deal. Like red light is great, but amber wavelength with red light and infrared together is like the triple wow factor. Okay, what you described yesterday with the poor child growth, exactly my situation with one of my kids. We did a voice scan with Ness and it too showed pancreas. There you go. See, I don't make all this stuff up, people. Glial remedy and one of the infoceuticals. Now I understand why. Thank you so much. You're a wealth of knowledge. Absolutely. It's looking at what comes up and saying somehow this makes sense. If I don't understand how it makes sense, I have to keep going till I do, right? I'm not saying it's going to be fixed in the first try, but if you're just relying on the fact that you look at bones, you look at growth hormone and you say, this is related to growth, this is what we perceive as growth, that's the effect of growth, right? There's so much more that interacts with that. Look for those markers that are coming up on the scan and see what you can do to reverse engineer that. And maybe even then we'll find that maybe 80% of the problem is that, and there still might be, 10% here and 10% there, but at least you're being able to do something different outside the box that you weren't able to do before. The pancreas is a very important organ. Everything is, but we kind of tend to think the brain, the heart, etc. But it's no accident or coincidence, in my opinion, that pancreatic cancer is one of the most lethal. The pancreas does a lot. All right, everybody. Well, I think we've kind of come to a close for today. It looks like there might be one last question that I can answer. Let's see. Someone said at some point, can you share how you take care of yourself? What does your daily routine look like? I'll answer that and I'll answer the COVID one, and then I will sign off. Oh, wow, we really did some questions today, didn't we? Okay, so what do I do? What are some of my non-negotiables? My absolute favorite supplement in the entire world is hyaluronic acid. I'm actually quite sad because it was from Claire Labs and they discontinued this product, so I have to find a new one. Hyaluronic acid is one of the best things that you can do in your entire life. I've been on it for probably almost 20 years, since my early 20s at least. This goes in, if you've ever heard of like Dr. Pollack's Easy Water, and if you've ever heard of water having a structure in the cells, etc. This goes in and kind of creates a density factor within the water, right? So it can have some structure, and so that there can literally be some resistance, right, or density for things to move around in the cells, in the space of the cells, or in the space of the tissues. And so this is almost kind of like an aether-like quality. The ether, right, that we talk about with the density property in space and all the other stuff. And you'll learn about this. I promise we'll make it simple if you're in the course. But that's why I call, us a part of the bigger equation, because all the principles that you see that work at that level actually come down to the micro level. So what does this have to do with what we do and why we do it, right? Or what I do and why I do it? That will allow tissues to be hydrated. If tissues can be hydrated, because hyaluronic acid binds up to 1,000, sometimes in some studies, 8,000 times its weight in water, okay? So if we're able to do that and hang on to hydration, the water is information. That space allows for that geometry flow, right? And that allows us to retain the information and the softwares as they should be, even though we're having interference, to kind of retain the ability to keep an inherent checks and balances system. Hydration also keeps you from being able to experience things like aging or accelerated aging. If you are properly hydrated, when you have stress on the elasticity of the skin, when we're bending, when we're moving, when we're cracking and stressing joints, there's enough cushion there. And so we're not actually having to crease these tissues because they're keeping so buoyant and so hydrated to be able to do so. So the best anti-aging you can do is to prevent the aging process, period, right? So I take hyaluronic acid to allow basically the water in my body to allow it to hold information and serve as a better antennae, if you will, for that information, not just within my own body, but within the whole sphere of everything. I love turmeric shots. I take turmeric and ginger shots every single night. Everybody's different, and so their elemental constitution is something you have to take into consideration. Me, I tend to run on the cooler side. So I do better with more, ginger, fiery things, etc. Turmeric is also very great to help you structure your water. A turmeric shot is quite literally some of the best things you can do. If you like structured water, turmeric shots are amazing as well. I do also take my root cause clinic tinctures. What are some other things? I do take adaptogens every night. And then I actually am very big into supporting my cellular health and also my subtle energy. So I'm always consistently taking tinctures for my electrons, for the pretty much, it just changes based on the needs of my scans, but I'm really targeting the factors like the Chinese medicine factors, the geometrics, the subtle energy realms that give rise to even how a cell oscillates. So it's not as simple as just saying, oh, a kidney cell and the way that it vibrates. Well, what literally gives rise to that, right? So I would say my base staples are hyaluronic acid, collagen, adaptogens. Those are the non-negotiables for me that I always do, just because I kind of do have a busy burn the candle life a little bit. And then from there, it just depends. I change up the frequencies and all of that. As far as what I do on the outside, I really, like I said, love microcurrent and I love red light. Red light, infrared, and amber light are great if you start doing that, especially in your early 20s. If you can, you could literally, you won't need any work or have to make up for that later with crazy advanced laser pills or things, in your 40s. As far as how, well, I could go into that more. That's enough for now on that one. I'll answer this last question, and then we will call it a day. Can we discuss post-COVID hair loss or stress-induced hair loss in both men and women? Yes. So with COVID, one of the things that I've noticed is that the way that the keratin and the way that the ACE receptors actually interact, there's a connection. So the COVID spike protein docks on that ACE receptor, and when it does that, it can create a myriad of effects, right? It can create an effect to where we inhibit the function of these two. Hence, it will see all the things that are related to the orthostatic, the blood pressure, et cetera, kind of things. But that's actually a receptor that's in many different areas. It exists in the gut, exists in the sinuses. So hence why that we're seeing these different waves of COVID, with the first one being the respiratory. We have ACE receptors there too. The second, the gut, and then now the third, the pharyngeal, like I said. But at the end of the day, all their Wi-Fi connects into manage and interact with keratin as well. And so hair, for example, is going to be affected in this case. I would recommend doing frequency for that. To be honest, I think that's the best that I've seen work so far, because that's a software problem at that point. You can take things that will help, but it may backfire on you, because if you're taking something to help your hair grow and the hair has a problem in the software to make it grow, it's exactly like your computer getting a little bit of a frozen, kind of screen. And then you start going, no, no, no. And now you're giving it, more work to do. It's going to crash. And so I would probably say that frequency, maybe administered with laser, is probably the best. And peptides, copper peptides are probably my favorite for that. They can do not just amazing wonders to help with reestablishing the proper connection to get that kind of signaling back on, but it's also kind of the go button to get the body back to where it was before, the literal nudge, to get it to do that. All right, everybody. I think that'll be it for today. We're going to come back tomorrow at 9 o'clock. And we'll have one more Beyond the Bloodwork Summit with a little bit more new information, answering some more questions. And make sure that if you already didn't catch up, if you missed yesterday, that you catch up on the recording from day one so that you can be filled in on everything and be up to date. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, everybody. I'd like to give super personalized answers, but that's just kind of where, if I had your data set, I could kill it. We could. If anybody ever wanted to volunteer for that, we could do that as an event. And we'll show you firsthand how you do this and you do that. And then you'll see everybody go, oh my gosh, yeah, I have that. Oh my gosh, I didn't realize I was going to be, oh my gosh, yes, this, yes, that. So volunteers. Okay, everybody's volunteering. All right, everybody. Okay, signing off now. We'll see you also tomorrow. Taylor's pregnant. Oh, congrats, Taylor. Lots of volunteers.